So that's an experience outside of St. Luke's that was very compelling for people when we were having that discussion. And then we were talking about experiences within St. Luke's, whether that was it in your pew? Was it out in the parking lot? Is it down here during coffee hour? What is it that means to meet God? And we talked about things like, what does worship look like? We talked about small groups. We talked about hospitality, the little things about smiling at folks that you don't know and introducing yourself. Does anybody else have any recollections from those conversations? Or even if it's new to you, when you think about here at St. Luke's and the idea of meeting God and having a place where people can meet God in a way that is safe and open and accessible. If you weren't able to participate then.
I wasn't at that meeting, but I'm getting a little bit of the idea in leading training. And for me, all those things are just so tied together. I mean, they're a process, but meeting God is what people do if you're reflecting God.
Great, so if you're reflecting that, then they're able to do that through you.
Yes. I can meet God through you or someone else, but equally important is for people to see God in you.
And that was the big takeaway, because when we kind of analyzed all of the work that we did on those Post-it charts and the dots and all those things, almost every one of the Meet God experiences was between a fellow worshiper, a fellow member of St. Luke's. It was not some ethereal mountaintop experience where the Lord presents himself to you in shining glory. It was, Mike invited me to go to the men's retreat, and I went and I met a lot of people, and then God manifests himself to me through my relationship with those guys.
We're gonna have another lake used to fall.
Yeah. What did you say, Patty? Sorry.
Roland Timberlake used to call it God's skin on.
Right. And so that was the big takeaway, and I think the realization as we go on this search for a new rector, and as we work with Reverend Ann, as we go through this transition, we have to keep reminding ourselves that the strength of this parish's ability to be Christ to the outside world is not based in anything other than ourselves and how we reflect sort of our own relationship with Christ, and how do we go out and engage with people, whether it's outside ministry like Brian does with the prison ministry, or it's something here that we do that's very simple, greeting people at the front door. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about this continuum of meeting God, then loving God, that personal relationship is how I'm going to frame that. So you meet God and then you develop this personal relationship, whatever that looks like for you. Then you transition into this loving and serving others. Talk for a minute at your tables about that transition. And if you're thinking about sort of that continuum of finding a place to meet God, and then you're moving into this personal relationship and loving God, and frankly, receiving the love he has for you, which at the Vesture retreat was my hardest thing to overcome. I realized that me meeting God didn't seem to be a problem, and me loving God didn't seem to be a problem. But this idea that he loved me all the time, no matter what, was harder, because we're all sort of flawed and broken people. And so I'd like to take 10 minutes and talk at your table about that next piece of when you're talking about building an experience where you're building a relationship with God individually. What does that look like here at St. Luke's? Maybe it looks like what it looks like for you now, or what have you seen in others? So it's a little bit of a personal conversation, but take a few minutes and talk about that.
Love is not just a feeling, it involves action. And so when we talk about loving God, there's an action involved. So I think we love God through what we do and how we interact with other people. For instance, just forgiving somebody could be one of the most loving things that we do for God. So that's
Great.
what it is for me.
Thank you.
And then I think the other thing we talked about is, in that same vein, letting the Holy Spirit work through us. And just in our professional lives, or our personal lives.
Okay. Anybody else from that table?
Our table talked a lot about, and we all had some to add to it, how difficult it's easier to love God than to be loved by God, to accept God's love, or anybody else's way.
Very good. Other thoughts from this table? Nancy, your table?
What was our table?
Anything else from you all specifically?
I just think as we mature, our feelings about all that changes and it morphs into, like Betty said, as you're younger, you focus on what's going on in your life. And as you grow and mature, you're able to accept or it changes, your focus becomes outward. And when your focus becomes outward, it's easier to invite and love people. And we just need to understand that, number one, God is not human. So you can't impose your feelings about God or God's feelings about you on God in a human way.
Right.
So if you made me mad one day and I didn't forgive you, it's not like me making God mad one day. Because he's
Right.
made a path. He's made a bridge where I can always get there and I'll just walk across.
No, it does. I like the piece about, I think, and I personally, I will just share with you, I feel the same way that over time, when you're working on that personal relationship, it does evolve its way into being a more outward-facing relationship rather than something that's inward. So that was very insightful. I appreciate that. Nancy, do you have anything to share? No? What about this table back here?
Well, again, I think through the mission, like I say, a lot of people love God. Obviously, we all probably do here, we wouldn't be here. Found God, love God. My experience, I don't do a lot of mission work, but on prison ministry, when you go in there and share the love of God with prisoners, and they drink it, they soak it up like a sponge. And it has a profound effect on their life, because like 80-something% of inmates that go through prison ministry, they have prayer groups, and they have dorms for Christians now here in Texas, because they found that if inmates get involved in finding God in prison, they don't end up back in prison. So the state of Texas is really behind now prison ministry. And Kairos and Jubilee are two groups, and it's extremely well organized. Every minute, every day, for 3 days we go in there, it is scripted. We just introduce these people to the Lord. And also throw out a lot of facts and figures to prove that Jesus is real, the Lord is real. And we aren't here, last group I was with, they said, we're not just pond scum here, some biological, pond scum that grew into a human being, And they have all these facts, scientific facts that, like gravity and everything that makes up the earth, if it's off like 1/1,000,000th of 1%, we wouldn't even be here. So anyway, and then we give talks, and then we play Christian music, we bring in food. And what happens is the Holy Spirit takes over this room for 3 days. And it affects people dramatically in the rest of their life, a lot of them. And so I think it's one thing to be a Christian, but another thing to share, your passion for the Lord. If you love the Lord and you share that with others, it can really affect people. in that point. They say to be with prisoners to be with God. I've been, when I was young, I went to Young Life, had some great young life, which I think was a really more here. And, I've been a baptized Christian my whole life, but I've never experienced anything like I have. If there's a truth.
Well, if you think about that, and that's from I think that the other side of that, which I'd like to hear from you and others, is we know how that can impact others and their ability to meet God and love God. But then when that happens, what does that mean for ourselves? How do you walk away from a prison ministry weekend?
Well, it impacts us just as much as it does them. Truthfully.
Because you'd already done the meeting part, right?
Huh?
You'd already done the meeting part.
Oh, yeah.
You'd already met God when you got there. You were already on your own journey. And then by sharing that with others,
absolutely.
It impacts you.
Well, not all of us. I'm sharing my testimony. We don't have testimony, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be Christians. And so, and then they go share it. And then other people share it. And I'm telling you, it really has a huge, it's like a wave that takes over these prisons. And, it really affects people. And then, like Craig Severson, his wife Ann works here, and he's been ill the last couple of years. He was really involved. He and Father Mike got me involved. And he also used to go, he did a lot of charity work. But, and a lot of the men that I go into prison with, it seems like it's the same people over and over that all I'm hearing. Because a lot of people are worried about going into prison. However, it's probably the safest place you'll ever be because there's nothing that's going to happen. The inmates wouldn't let it happen to begin with. And so it's very, very safe. And it's a very, it's just an amazing experience. And to see the Lord work in such a powerful way amongst grown men. I was telling them, I had a guy that's the meanest looking guy you probably ever met in your life, truthfully. He was a white supremacist, 6'5", about 280 pounds when I met him at the Department of State jail. And for 3 days, I had ball in my arms. And I've been in contact with him since he's released now. And they segregate people in gangs. They were called seg. They would segregate them. Again, these prisons now, medium security prisons, they have dorms. But if you're a seg, you're in one cell by yourself 23 hours a day. You only get out for 1 hour a day. So they segregate these people because they're in gangs. They can fight amongst gangs. So for 23 hours a day for about 2 years, this guy got 1 hour a day for 2 years until he was finally released. And they did that to supposedly protect him. He said several people in that seg unit committed suicide. He said the only reason I'm still here is because I found Jesus at the Department of State jail weekend that me and my buddies went over there. That's, it's life-changing for them and for the volunteers.
How do you feel about yourself?
What?
How do you feel about yourself when you're walking away to your car after one of those weekends?
You feel like you've been washed in the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
That's how you feel. Pretty amazing.
So who else here has had maybe not that experience? I haven't had that experience, but a situation where you've had the opportunity to share as part of your own journey. Think about that for 2 seconds. Think about a time where you've been able to impact someone else in that way. It could be something as simple as volunteering at VBS. It could be acolytes. It could be whatever it is that you're doing, reading at one of the services, participating in the choir. How do you feel when that's over? And has anyone here had an experience where you served someone else in a Christ-like way and they were positively impacted? You could see it, they told you, you could feel it, whatever it is. Yes?
Yeah, for sure. So
Yeah.
mission trip, taking youth on a mission trip.
So then that outcome for them, and then is it similar? I mean, what does that look like for us as the people doing the action? Because I'm going back to the very first sort of thing when we think about what these are and what people have shared throughout these tables is love is action. So we talk about loving God. That's an active relationship on our part. And just like we talked about on the meeting God part, because what did we decide? Everybody said meeting God is really how we engage with one another and how we behave with one another and how we support one another. So loving God is similar in that sense of, are we letting, I think Maria said, you let that love that you have for God flow through you to someone else, right? So how do you feel when that happens?
You said something about loving God, loving others, loving God is an active verb, and being loved is a passive verb.
Right.
So that's the side I think you're trying to get to.
Mm-hmm. The action piece.
Oh,
You know, and it's not just about the other person. So there's this huge benefit to ourselves when we have those experiences. And I think everyone's always looking for that huge moment. And sometimes it can be really, really small. Mike.
Well, I guess I attack it from a slightly different direction. I like to think of, and again, I'm in the sales business, so you guys gotta understand sometimes I think of things at the sales level, but I like to think of it as in terms of providing opportunities for those things to occur. And back up to the sales analogy is that in sales, you're not selling somebody, you're actually giving them opportunities to react to something and say yes, no, whatever it may be, possibly whatever. So when the men's group kind of puts together its things, a lot of what we're trying to do is just provide opportunities for men to join and get together and be around each other and let whatever happens, happens. Because ultimately, the difficulty sometimes for men in the Episcopal church is that if you come to church and you go to the pew and you worship and you do the liturgy and you leave, you don't connect to people because that's just not part of our sort of liturgy and services. So you have to have other opportunities. And so I found if we do like a men's retreat, where guys can come and hang out together and do their manly things in a manly way with other men. And also the chicken barbecue where guys can come and play with fire and have fun doing burnt offerings to God. That works out pretty well. And then other opportunities is when we do projects, which is basically involving chainsaws or tractors or something that maybe will go bang in the night. The idea is just give them the opportunities and then let God do the rest of it. And that's I think Brian will say that's one of the reasons he got sort of pulled in, because we just gave him the opportunity to come. He joined in and he found there was a place for him here. Nico talks about that all the time. He says he was real nervous about coming to church because he wasn't really thinking that was where he wanted to be. He was sort of his family drawing in there.
Right.
And then he saw us with a bunch of fire and smoke and he said, them my people over there.
Well, and I think you've touched on something that's really important, because when we had the vestry retreat originally to talk about these things, and Nancy and Brad can both attest this. Jim, were you there? You were there for that, right? Yeah. We talked about the phrase opportunity a lot and how we were sort of crafting some of the statements and some of the ideas about the opportunity to give people the opportunity to meet God, give the people the opportunity to love God and love and serve one another. And I think that's sort of a great segue into the next piece of this, is when you look at St. Luke's as it is today, not where we want to be, but where we are today, what are those opportunities maybe that you've experienced yourself, or that when you look at the offerings and programs and experiences that we have on a recurring basis, take 5 minutes and visit at your tables and kind of come up with a short list or a long list, whatever it is, of the opportunities you think we have here that are impactful in allowing those opportunities to people grow in their own relationship with Christ and love God. So just 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back.
Fits now perfectly into this. So we have all the things we've been talking about. And if we prepare St. Luke's properly, then we will also be creating opportunities for teens, children, babies, and the whole story of what's going to happen a week ago. As volunteers, at the Armadillo Barbecue. And this particular day, we were trying to enliven an after-school outside program. Because kids are coming home, they don't have parents, they lock the door, they never see the sunshine. I got there a few minutes later, all these things had already been set up by the people who were there. And I saw this little girl sitting on the stairs. And it's like, so I walked over and I thought, she's never been downstairs before, she was like 2, but not very good. She was big for 2, but she, I also had a very small 2-year-old. Anyway, so I held her hand as she, well, of course, I had this piece of her. Then she wanted to swing, so we did this kind of do for a long time. Then she wanted to play some singers. So we go over where there's somebody else, and she's playing this hand all the time. Things that keep us focused, say something, creative. And this other little 2-year-old, I spent probably an hour, at least an hour and a half with these 2 children. So the time was over, parents said, let me get the children. And we were standing around. And all of a sudden, this corner of my eye, there's something before me.
Which always remembers someone sort of be aware. Because we don't.
On a non-adult level. Well, that's true. Yes.
Yeah, true.
But we can't forget to create on some sort of study that the church want to see us. And that's got to be.
What is that?
And I think that doing, acting now in any way is the way to provide those spiritual growing edges. Our growing edges is a place to grow spiritually.
I think what the Catholic Church is for all of us, giving us the opportunity to live our lives.
Which means you have to say no. So that they're not valid. But you have to
Ed and I actually was talking about this, about how sometimes you have those chances, and he said, I feel sorry for people who just decide when we tell, it really, shared opportunities and invested in connect together. Absolutely, still we have people who just, for whatever reason, there's always some reason that someone's going to try this.
So it's on.
We can't quit trying.
Just one more minute.
What is this thing under here, this red?
Oh, I think that's just when it sits up here. It's a thought.
I was teaching one time, talking about verbs. You know, when asking what verbs were outside, did, done, trash, run, jump, all that stuff. Like your friends.
So when do you leave for your
Thursday. Well, what about me? I love my hobbies.
Arizona?
What's great? And they all say, well, I love us because. I said, well, if you think I'm loving you for 2 days, what's wrong with you? So, I mean, you know. Yeah, but it's just, that is human nature, that's very basic level, talking about like ignorance, like, that is who they are, they do not really, almost never, like, they'll say, I'll say, well, I have things I don't love, be good.
I've done it many times.
Yes, we could.
It's the disconnect between feeling and action. Your actions are informed by your feelings.
Right.
Your feelings can change based on behavior that you engage in.
In this case, the verbs provided, sometimes those things are in that way. And to be can provide energy.
So we're gonna bring the group back.
I just feel like.
You can wrap up those conversations, which are vibrant at this moment.
I am your God. Be and.
And the Lord be with you. Okay, now we're back. It's the great Episcopal attention getter, yeah. So great conversation around, this time let's start back here. I heard everyone speaking, so I want to hear from everyone there.
Well, I hope that the daughter of the king, and how the reception service sensation, and how this group, we had a meeting yesterday, we had 3 minutes to share. It was a beautiful meeting, we learned so much, it was that wonderful. But the few receptions, there are these teams that work together, and you all know this. But they get to know each other, if they're serving food, or they're making food, or whatever. And then in the reception, and the people who come here, they've never been to San Francisco. They see us work together, and they can't believe that love is just everywhere, And they just, like yesterday, Mariana talked for 15 minutes about how her family and all of their friends came and could not believe the reception, and they felt so much more. And it fed us every time these things happen. And as an individual in the group, we get to know each other personally. We pray for people, and we also deliver the flowers from the altar to study us. It's just, it gives you so much to be able to do that.
Agreed, and when I was at Jack's memorial, a lot of work went into that day, and whether it's the altar guild and I think it's interesting from staff to volunteers, whether it's altar guild or Daughters of the King, we have a lot of activities that go on here, and that is an absolute service of love, because it's a lot of work, and to be there for those families, particularly around memorial services. Having just hosted a small one here yesterday for my father-in-law, that is a tremendous way to support the community when they need it the most. So thanks to everyone who participates in that. Here. We just need one more voice from this table. Come on. Oh, she wasn't sitting. Did you throw her under the bus like she wasn't sitting?
Yes, yes, he did.
What do you know at the library ladies?
Oh, yeah, well, we just hope everybody in the service, giving a reason for people to come to church and giving them enjoyment and pleasure, and it's fun for us sharing things, something we love. And I don't know how that relates to Andy. I was going to say one thing though. We've been talking about how we can share. My sister, I come from a family of 13 children, and my sister was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and then was told she would live 3 or 4 months without treatment, 9 or 10 with treatment. And families sort of scattered, didn't spend a lot of time with each other. But they gathered all of this, was during the pandemic, gathered all of us together at her house. So 11 of her brothers and sisters were there. And we processed and we processed. And my sister was a very, very faithful Christian. And the very last thing she said to us was, she said, I know this is hard. She said, but I'm not afraid, because I know that I am going to see Jesus when this is done. And I'm going to see my little boy who died when he was 4 years old. And I can look forward to that. And that is what I want for you. That I want you to have this same faith. And so many of my brothers and sisters are not regular church goers or anything, but I thought that was her closing thought, that this is what she wants for us, and this is what she needs. And I will never forget that.
Wow.
To know when you're dying, that it's going to be all right, and your faith is giving you that. And anyway, and she did. She lived 10 months.
That's wonderful.
Well, you weren't here, but you were here. That's right on.
What about this table here? About the opportunities to spoiler alert, so you actually know what the question was the opportunities that we create for people to experience experiencing Christ and building that personal relationship and loving Christ.
Story. With young children who may not have had much attention or anything like that, and just in a short span of like an hour, hour and a half. The one child was so touched, like literally went up her leg. I mean, earlier I mentioned an opportunity that where I was actually quite angry because I was aggrieved from something, or somebody did something where I was wrong, and I was able to keep myself within myself without, I was upset, had something unfair happen to me, but I didn't let it get to the point where I took out those negative feelings on someone else. And for that person, even though I was upset, I was like being, I thought being taken advantage of, I didn't let that turn me into like, I'm gonna unleash negativity back. I think that's something probably a few years ago I would not have been able to do that. So I was able to stand up for myself, but actually come to a conclusion where people were better off in the end than being in more conflict and in more upset and pain.
Being loving. A guiding principle is being loving is.
So like I was concerned about being right, but it's more important to do right than it is to be right, and it's more important to be more. It's better to be loving than it is to be correcting the situation. When you're right all the time, it actually becomes an addiction, and you can become indignant, you can become haughty, even though you are correct. If you're not loving, you're not going to communicate that well. It's just going to be a contest instead of it coming to satisfying.
Right. Anything else from this table?
I was thinking that for me, I'm a teacher, and where I feel most energized is, and most spiritual is when I'm around kids. Not that I'm around them now, because I'm still scarred from teaching, but eventually I plan to, whenever, so we talked sometimes, she talked about the experience with children, I talked about my experience with children, so then I would have to name, Christian Ed or VBS, and those kind of places for me are the places that I think that we do a huge service as members here and as Christians to the God, to people who haven't had those experiences.
Very good.
We want to make sure that we're doing all these things, these creating experiences of acceptance and love and service and all that are available to people younger than adults too. We want to make that sure that's on your list.
Sure, absolutely. And real quickly, this table back here before we go upstairs, anything y'all want to share from here?
Quick list. So one, Eucharist is a way to see the physical presence of Jesus. The staff is so incredibly welcoming, especially Barb and Nancy came up a million times in the discussion. The fact that people care about each other, the fact that we have so many different small group opportunities, Bible studies, ladies guilds, Daughters of the King. And we talked about the fact that they bring flowers to weddings. That's just beautiful. Flowers are such a beautiful thing. We talked about this session on Sunday mornings, and the hospitality we feel here, and the youth. So.
Very good.
And the dogs.
Yeah, the dogs. The dogs, yes.
My kids want to come, my grandkids' sons want to come because of dogs.
They are amazing.
Our
Best thing
Nanny
Right.
has dogs in the church, I'm like.
So before we head upstairs, I just want to say we're going to continue this conversation next week. So please come back, bring a friend, and we will continue this conversation even beyond next week, but specifically around this topic, we're going to continue next week. So join us again. And based on what we heard, we need to go upstairs, and we probably need to create an opportunity for someone to meet Jesus, right? That's what we're here for. So we've been having a lot of new faces in church lately. The last several weeks, it seems like it picked back up after Labor Day. Folks are starting to get back in the routines. So look for those unfamiliar faces, even if they already attend here. Meet someone new, and let's invite them to be a part of our community. Y'all have a great day.
Did they do it like
7:45.
like 8 o'clock?
9 o'clock. Or 11:30. They want the music too.
Sorry.
One of them.
Yes.
And I feel like that would be great.